Team USA announced its preliminary roster for the World Juniors. We'll talk about why Cole Eiserman has not been invited and James Hagens has. We'll talk about some more absences of note, and we'll end things off with a head-to-head between Conor Geekie and Jagger Firkus, all coming up on today's show on Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi and joined by Sebastian and we've got a packed episode for you today. We'll start off by discussing some notable absences from the recently released Team USA preliminary camp roster. 16 forwards, 10 defensemen, 3 goaltenders, a lot of interesting decisions in there. We'll talk about why Quentin Musty and Hunter Brzustewicz and Charlie Stramel aren't there. We'll talk about why James Hagens was preferred over Cole Eiserman. And then in our final segment, we'll be doing a head-to-head. Been a while since we've done that. We'll go through our head-to-head between Conor Geekie and Jagger Firkus. I'll be defending the big guy for once, so that'll be a change. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. Alrighty, so let's get things started here. We'll start off with Team USA's preliminary camp roster, kind of break down the interesting omissions in this kind of preliminary roster. Guys who weren't even invited to even try to make the cut. Let's start with Quentin Musty, because I know we have very differing opinions on whether or not Quentin Musty should have made this roster. I don't think he should have, and it's mainly just because there are so many players in this top six, and you want Quentin Musty playing a top six role if he's going to make this team. He's not the type of player who's going to give you kind of bottom six, impactful, kind of two-way value. So I just, what's your argument for Musty? I just don't see a spot for him in this top six.
He is 1 point shy of 2 points a game currently in the OHL. This is a player that is a tremendously capable offensive force, and he's very, very versatile in the offensive zone as well. He has grown really impressively in the last year and a bit. I remember our first draft year viewings of his were always very chaotic, often lacked enthusiasm coming from our scouting team, but his progression week to week consistently has been really quite impressive since then, and he's made his playmaking game a real strength. His on-puck intelligence is now also a strength, when at the beginning of his draft year it seemed like his biggest weakness. And overall, he's a player that can make a difference in a split second, and he can do that on a third line as well. I don't believe that he needs to be inside a top six to be effective. I think that a third line role would fit him just fine. And there's quite a few players that were invited to this camp that I think are a lot more limited in what they can offer. Like a player like Carey Terrence, for instance, another OHLer, but one that USA Hockey is a lot more familiar with and clearly likes more than Quentin Musty, got an invite, and he's a shoo-in for the fourth line. That said, if there's an injury throughout the tournament, and recalling a player is always a bit more difficult when you are playing a tournament in Sweden compared to in North America when all your players are based here. Bringing Quentin Musty offers you versatility, and I think that not even inviting him to camp and giving him a chance to crack that lineup is USA Hockey shooting themselves in the foot a little bit, because I believe that he would be one of the 6 best offensive pieces on that team. And even if he wouldn't be in a top 6 role straight out based off of chemistry and players that are more familiar with each other, I still think that not bringing him is a real mistake from USA Hockey's perspective. Not that they really need to make like a perfect decision in who they ice to like have a very good chance at winning this tournament. Like, this roster is ridiculously good anyways, But I really do think that this is kind of the USA Hockey establishment doubling down on this anti-CHL stance, and in doing so, they're making their chances worse of winning the championship, and I just don't think that's overly intelligent.
Listen, here's the thing. Kerry Turant's OHLer, Gavin Hayes OHLer, like the thing is they're building the roster a certain way. I don't think this is bias against any particular league. I think this is just overall them making a decision that makes more sense for their roster. I mean, you look at this top six. We're already talking about Cutter Gauthier, Will Smith, Jimmy Snuggerud. Oliver Moore has a chance. Frank Nazar has a chance. James Hagens has a chance. Isaac Howard. The depth of offense on this team is ridiculous. That's not even including Gabe Perreault, and even Will Whitelaw has an outside chance at this kind of top six role because of his offensive skill. Like, as much as I love,
but why would you bring Whitelaw over Musty for a top six chance?
Obviously, like that
right? Like,
for sure,
like
I get that. The only thing is, like, when you mention the Turances and the Hayeses and all those players, like, these are players who excel in specific roles in specific situations that Musty just doesn't. And like the names I've already mentioned, not the outside shots, the 8 guys that are like almost surefire, like even Gavin Brindley's in this conversation, Rutger McGorty as well. Like it never ends offensively for USA in like the kind of top 6 conversation. I don't see Musty being able to compete right now with these guys in terms of overall impact. Maybe in terms of skill, sure, but like there's so much. I mean, that's not even. I mean, we can have the exact same conversation about Hunter Brzustewicz, who was a defenseman picked by the Vancouver Canucks. Was it the Canucks? I think it was the Canucks, right?
yeah, third round.
Like, it's the same conversation. This is a player who's outranked offensively by a lot of the players ahead of him, even though he's top 3 in the OHL in points. That's great. That's good. Lane Hudson, Zeev Bouillon, and Seamus Casey alone are going to take all the power play minutes, are going to take all the offensive zone time, and like, who do you play him with at that point? Like, it's probably going to be Lane Hudson and Ryan Chesley as a top pair. Then you have Seamus Casey and whoever else, Steve Bouillon on the third pair. Like, wherever you put Brzustewicz in that conversation, you're gonna be doubling down on offensive defensemen on a pair, and like that's just how USA plays.
But they invited an offensive defenseman who has not been very good this season in Jake Livanavage. Like, I think that a lot of these decisions that USA Hockey is making, like, you can make an argument that this is about style, but they are bringing players that are stylistically kind of similar that are just quite clearly worse. William Whitelaw is not a better player than Quentin Musty right now. He's not going to be more impactful than Quentin Musty is going to be right now. Same thing, like Jake Livanavage is not better than Hunter Brzustewicz right now. Same thing with who was the other one that was brought? I mean, Eric Polkamp got invited. Patrick Geary got invited. These are both players that I don't think are going to be more impactful. And sure, you might not have the perfect stylistic fits, but at the World Junior Championships, it isn't always about stylistic fits. These are a bunch of players put together that often have quite little chemistry. And you need skilled players that are adaptable. And Brzustewicz and Musty have really shown how much more adaptable they are this season compared to last year. And I think that not inviting them is a clear mistake. But again, this is a stacked lineup. It doesn't really matter. I'm getting angry over mainly just
the one thing
very good players getting left out when they really shouldn't have been.
The one thing I'll say in defense of this is all the names you've mentioned are players who are in their final year of eligibility for the World Juniors. That's the only thing I'll say in response to that. But real quick on Charlie Stramel, who's not there either. I think we can both agree on this. He did not deserve to be part of this lineup. And I think this is like one of the only cases, at least I can remember in recent years, of a player being at the World Juniors in his draft year and then not being at the World Juniors a year after. It's been that bad for Stramel. I think he has 1 goal in like 10 games and that's it. Like, he hasn't even reached 2 points this year. Like, it's not going good for Charlie Stramel. The Minnesota Wild took a big shot on him in the first round. I didn't see it then. I see it even less now. Big questions with Stramel. But I'm hoping like just staying in the NCAA, like continuing to hone his craft and like hopefully like working his game up will help him out a lot. But that's our first segment. We'll get into our second segment where we talk a bit more about the players who are there, including James Hagens, and a lot more. We'll get into that after these messages from our sponsors over at Jace Medical. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics right now in the middle of the pretty much the worst flu season in over a decade. This can be really scary, and Jace Medical offers you a reliable source of medication that you can get delivered to you anytime. They've got a variety of different medications you can order, but what we want to focus on is the Jace case. The Jace case is a really useful tool. It's a case of 5 life-saving antibiotics you can take with you anywhere if you like to travel and you get sick often on the road. Make sure to keep a Jace case with you. It's fairly useful. All you need to do to get a Jace case is just fill out a form. And in some cases, you'll hop on a quick call with one of their physicians, and before you know it, you've got a Jace case on the way, ready to be used. They've got on-call pharmacists that can guide you through what the dosage is, how to use this medication, that kind of stuff. And yeah, overall, just a bunch of useful tools in order to keep you healthy and keep you ready for the flu season. So visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular costs. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order. Alrighty, so let's move on to some more USA roster talk. I want to focus a bit more on the players that are there because it's an interesting lot of players. First and foremost, let's talk about James Hagens being on this roster ahead of Cole Eiserman. We hinted at that in some recent episodes, but for me, it's an obvious choice. Like, I'm sure you agree. I mean, it's just James Hagens fits the style of Team USA and fits their needs especially a lot more than Cole Eiserman does, on top of just being the better player right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just exactly.
I agree. Like, he is quite clearly the better fit and also quite clearly the better player at the moment. Like, it hasn't really been a question in any of my U18 viewings of the NTDP this season who the best player on that lineup is. And it's been James Hagens throughout. And Cole Eiserman is still a quite limited player. Like, he is a pure goal scorer, and especially with the World Junior Championship roster, you need some versatility in there. And as we were saying in the last segment, like, if players like Musty weren't brought, who bring a lot more offensively in terms of like versatility, in terms of being able to adapt into different roles on different lines, Eiserman would have to be the trigger man on his line, and that would also limit a little bit more what USA could do with him in that lineup. So it's not very surprising to me. I know a lot of people might be shocked by this, considering that Eiserman has been really hyped up for quite a while now. But for this roster, I think it makes sense to not bring him. And the arguments that we were making, that you were making in the last segment about wanting to also then bring some fourth line style players, you really can't have Cole Eiserman on the fourth line. Like, if
that's about as
questionable for a fourth line role, Eiserman is a big question mark too. So it's not a surprise at all. And James Hagens has a shot of making a top 6 role for himself at this tournament, especially with guys like Musty not being brought. So it's going to be exciting to see, because this is a 16-year-old brought for Team USA, and I don't remember the last time that a 16-year-old was brought to an American World Championships roster. It's been a while, at least.
I think he's 17 now, but I think Jack Hughes was in that conversation. At least Austin Matthews.
But Austin Matthews, I think, was the last one, because Jack Hughes, I forget. Yeah, but either way, it's been a couple years at least, and it's indicative of just how talented and versatile and mature James Hagens' game already is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and beyond that, I mean, it's just we're talking about Eiserman. I think that's about as far from a fourth line or bottom 6 role player as you can get. Like, Eiserman is your trigger man, but there are a lot of those in this year's roster. Carter Gauthier, Ryan Leonard. Those kind of guys are going to be kind of playing those roles in that top 6. Even Jimmy Snuggerud can go in that conversation. I just don't see a fit for him in the top 6 that makes sense for him to be playing a triggerman role. And like, with the depth of offense that they have, like, for me, if Musty's not making this roster, Eiserman isn't either. Like, there's just no doubt about it. But yeah, I mean, I find that very interesting because, I feel like a lot of people, at least in the online sphere, have been hyping up Eiserman as kind of the second coming of Cole Caulfield in terms of this next like big goal scoring, force out of the NTDP. But Caulfield's game was a lot more intricate and refined, I'd say, than Yzerman's game is right now. And that's weird because like you're talking about a 5'7" player who spent his first like 3 years in college, like or first 2 years in college. Like this is a player who needed development, and Caulfield was still at the same age, more refined overall than Yzerman. Like I'm not saying like pump the brakes because he's definitely a very good goal scorer. He's the best goal scorer in this class, but like
Yeah.
there's a reason why he's not making these rosters. There's a reason why he's not in our top five, respectively. Like there are reasons for this, and it's because there are some clear cut weaknesses in his game that like aren't just things you can kind of overcome with goal scoring ability. It's like things that you need to uplift your goal scoring ability that he doesn't have. So yeah, like Yzerman needs some work, but like if you refine him well, my goodness, that shot is ridiculous. Like, yeah, it'll be exciting to watch him go about. But I want to talk about a couple undrafted prospects that made this cut. First and foremost, we mentioned him already, Jake Livanavage. He's playing decent minutes or in the NCAA right now, but nothing really overwhelming enough that I would think like, yeah, this is a guy who needs to make this cut. But this is a player who like barely missed the cut of eligibility in terms of age. This is his last year of eligibility. If you're gonna, I like the fact that they're giving these guys a shot. Because Hunter Brzustewicz and other prospects like they're going to be there next year, and you can give them a shot then. But like these guys, this is their last chance, and I'm glad to see that USA is giving them an opportunity. But yeah, it's Jake Livanavage and Patrick Geary, which are the two undrafted prospects that are making this roster, along with the goaltender there, Sam Hillebrandt, who's been having a good season as well. I was surprised to see some undrafted prospects in this roster. I don't think either of them make the cut, but I'm glad they're at the camp, right? Like that's just good for hockey.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a nice story for sure. I think that, especially with a player like Livanavage, who is at his best on the power play, I find it a difficult argument to bring him over Brzustewicz from a sporting perspective. If this is really more of an idea of giving these human beings this opportunity and this experience of going through the camp, that I think is a lot more understandable. But from the actual like scouting or sporting perspective, it's not particularly close between a player like Hunter Brzustewicz and these two undrafted players. But yeah, like we'll see how the camp develops and who they end up bringing. Like we always see some surprises, right? Like last year we saw a then undrafted Luke Mittelstadt crack the lineup and play pretty well at the tournament, actually, in a bottom pairing role for Team USA. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that roster shakes out.
For sure. I'm also really curious to see how Eric Bolkamp shakes out. He's a San Jose Sharks prospect drafted in the 5th round. He's not the offensive style of the glut of players we're talking about, the Buyams and Caseys and Hudsons. He's more of a well-rounded defensive element, but with decent mobility, decent two-way ability. But he's a kind of short and stout type of player who hits hard and defends his spots really well. So he can be a player you can pair with a Aziv Buyam on a bottom pair and just see what happens, that kind of stuff. It could be interesting to see him kind of sneak in there. I'd be surprised because of how good the rest of this team is, but we'll see. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll talk about a head-to-head coming up. First time in a while we've done this. We'll talk about Conor Geekie versus Jagger Firkus. That's all coming up after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers Stay Hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get the chance at $150 in free bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 that you can use on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team to win the Super Bowl or your least favorite quarterback to throw 3 interceptions in the next game, the choice is yours with FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so let's end things off with another disagreement. We'll talk about
Let's go.
Conor Geekie versus Jagger Firkus as a head-to-head comparison. Conor Geekie was an 11th overall pick of the Arizona Coyotes in the 2022 NHL draft, and Jagger Firkus was picked 35th overall by the Seattle Kraken. So I win then, right? That's where the conversation ends, right? No, but I
The
mean,
true scout you are, Hadi.
yeah, absolutely. There is an actual conversation to be had. These are two players that are really, really good. Jagger Fergus is playing decent minutes. Man, his program escapes me. It's the same program
Moose
as
Jaw.
Braden Yeager. Moose Jaw, that's what it is. He's playing really good minutes in Moose Jaw, almost a goal per game, or even maybe above a goal per game, something like that.
2 under. Very close.
2 under a goal per game. Yeah, his goal scoring ability was really like probably my favorite thing about him in this draft year. You compare that to Conor Geekie, who's playing really, really, really good hockey. But for me, what sets Geekie ahead of Fergus is the progression in Geekie's game versus the progression in Fergus's. I think Geekie's come a lot further than Conor Geekie. Geekie has come a lot further than Jagger Firkus has so far. But yeah, what's your argument for Jagger Firkus stylistically, but also just in terms of overall upside?
I think that Jagger Firkus is an incredibly versatile offensive weapon. As you said, I think he has the best shot in that draft class in 2022. I think that it surpasses the other snipers that were in that class, like Lekaramaki and Kamel. And on top of that,
Yeah.
this is an elite level handler. His playmaking game has really come very, very close to matching his goal scoring ability at the WHL level. And I think that translates to pro hockey as well. And on top of that, he's one of the smartest players that's still in the CHL right now. He's an incredibly intelligent offensive piece, really dynamic, really creative, high pace. And I'm a really big believer that he's going to be an impactful top 6 scorer at the NHL level. I agree with you. I think that Conor Geekie has progressed more than Jagger Firkus has. But I don't think that what Firkus needed since his draft year was overall like progression, or I think he mainly needed to develop what he already had and double down on the strengths he already had. With Geekie, there were some clear weaknesses that needed addressing. With Fergus, just needed to keep working on what he's been doing so well for so long. And that's exactly what he's done so far. So this is a player that to me projects just as well now as he did on draft day. And that is a very, very good thing, because I took a pretty bullish stance on him on draft day. There's a lot more risk in his profile on draft day than there is now, because he's continued to show the same things continuously. And I believe that the intelligence is really going to facilitate all those excellent elite level tools to translate to pro hockey.
Yeah. By the way, we're having this conversation because they're both tied in points right now in the WHL with 49. Fergus has 24 goals and Geekie has 20. But overall, for me, what I'm seeing from Conor Geekie right now is a pure play driver, a powerful, powerful straight line skater. His acceleration's still bad. Like it's not necessarily a good thing, but his top speed, when he reaches it, like he's unstoppable. Like once he reaches that top speed, you just can't push through him. You can't stick check him because his wingspan is just massive. But beyond just being big, his playmaking ability, his vision, his ability to thread pucks through the smallest seams, but also identify those seams, has just been so impressive. Like for me right now, he's playing with Matt Savoy, he's playing with a couple other like really decent players, and he's the best player on the ice. And yeah, no, I'm a massive, massive fan of what I've seen from Conor Geekie this season. Um, yes, he was drafted 11th overall, but like I had him in the 20s. I had Fergus in the same range, but the gap has grown between the two for me. Whereas for you, it's kind of the opposite, where like you had Geekie at 31st in your rankings and Fergus at what, 13?
13th,
Right?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now the gap is shortened between the two, right?
Certainly. It's definitely a lot smaller now than it was on draft day. Like
Yeah.
Geekie would not be a player I'd be ranking at 31st overall in a redraft now. He'd be inside the top 20 for sure.
Mhm.
But I still have to lean Firkus between these two players. And yes, like Geekie is more projectable. There's a better chance that he becomes an NHL piece than Jagger Firkus. But I think that Firkus has really, really impressive top line potential. And with Geekie, I really do see him topping out as a second line piece. And the progression I've seen from Fergus makes me even more confident in doubling down on my risk and in backing him now compared to draft day. So I really can't give up on this kid. I think that he's going to be a high-end goal scorer for a long time, and especially playing with defensively capable centers at the NHL level like Shane Wright and Matty Beniers. I think he'll be well insulated. Like, the defensive game still is not a strength by any means.
Yeah, very
but
much.
He won't have to do that. And I think he can play on both wings. He's so versatile offensively. He makes all the offensive players around him better in every offensive zone situation. He's gotten significantly better in transition. I see him using the same strength that he uses offensively to get the puck out of the defensive zone and into the offensive zone. He's a lot less linear in his skating and his routes in transition now than he was in his draft year. And overall, I'm just seeing like all of his strengths continue to improve. And while his weaknesses haven't necessarily taken huge steps to improvement, I just don't think that they had to. And I don't think that they are fundamental to his game really translating to the NHL level.
Yeah, I mean, you compare that with Conor Geekie, who's like from day one, like a big strength of his was the defensive side of the game. Like
Oh, hugely.
he understands the game at a really good level. I think that Fergus's defensive lackings aren't a lack of effort, they're a lack of understanding. Whereas for me, Conor Geekie already processes and anticipates the game at a much higher level than Fergus does. Even though Fergus's puck skills are like well and above, better than Geekie's. I just think that you can develop Geekie into something much more sustainable, much more impactful overall, and like they'll probably end up playing in the same range of minutes on the respective teams, with Geekie playing a bit more of kind of second power play, second penalty kill, whereas Fergus is probably going to be like first power play, no penalty kill, that kind of stuff. But
Yeah,
overall, I think they're going to be playing very similar minutes, with Geekie being more impactful overall. But time will tell with those two. Honestly, they're two very, very, very different players, and
hugely.
their development is going to be very interesting to keep up with, because it'll kind of give you a good blueprint as to how you kind of move forward with your scouting. Like it's a decent kind of thought process in terms of who ends up being better. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out our 24/7 news channel, Locked On Sports Today. It's got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports around the world. And make sure to tune in for our next show as we break down some interesting news regarding Yuri Slafkovsky, Team Canada possibly. We'll get into all that very soon. This has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.